Yes, we are live now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this book panel from Shonglap's Considerations. For those who may not know Shonglap's Considerations, Shonglap is a biannual journal. It is published January and July, and it's mostly focused on literary and cultural themes. So we have recently launched from this journal a special issue, a special section called Considerations Virtual Seminar Series, and have had about four seminars over the last virtual seminars over the last few months. So this is my absolute pleasure today to welcome the speakers and also the panelists. My name is Shodhi Bhattacharya. I'm one of the two co-editors of this journal, and I'm absolutely delighted that Shonglap is doing this particular book panel, which includes not only the other co-editor, Arka Chattopadhyay, but also Samrat Sengupta, who we have known for a long time and has been an associate and an accomplice in this particular venture. So all three of us are co-editors of this volume on Nabarun Bhattacharya, on which we are going to be doing this virtual seminar today. This is the book on Nabarun Bhattacharya, which we called Nabarun Bhattacharya, Aesthetics and Politics in a World After Ethics, came out in early October 2020. The book had, to us at least, a very unique situation or sort of a publication history to it. Before we started, even thought about this project, all three of us, three editors, were variously inspired by Nabarun Bhattacharya's writings and his work and his sort of conversations and speech. So when Nabarun Bhattacharya sort of departed us I think it was in 2014, we wanted to dedicate an issue from Shonglap in memory of Nabarun's work, and we had a supplement in 2015 dedicated to Nabarun's work. And from then on, we also thought about publishing a book on Nabarun. Thankfully, we could have published in 2020, but just wanted to make sure that this journey, this particular publication, was not sudden or abrupt. It had its history in the last 5 or 6 years in the making. So what we plan to do today is we will talk about, of course, our experiences of reading and understanding Nabarun, and also about this book as panel coordinators, or Coach Samrat and I. But we would also like to ask our guests today about their experiences of working with or on Nabarun, not only necessarily in the book, which a couple of them have contributed to, but also in general to know more about Nabarun and his work. So the housekeeping, very briefly, we will go the panelists, the panel coordinators, so Sourit, Arka, and Samrat, they will share their experiences very briefly, and we'll open this up for the speakers, the guest speakers, to share their experiences. Just quickly, one of our guest speakers today, Suman Mukhopadhyay, he will be with us till 7:30 IST, but we are very happy for you to field any queries or any questions, run past any commentary that you have after he finishes as the first guest speaker as soon as possible. Or anyway, we can always have other questions and take them on board, and rather later on pass them on to Shumanda, as we affectionately know him. So I will now pass the mic, the proverbial mic, to my co-editor and the other coordinator, the second coordinator, or rather one of the two coordinators, Samrat Sengupta. Very quickly again, to introduce Samrat Sengupta. Samrat Sengupta is an assistant professor of English literature at Shombiloni Mahavidyalaya in Kolkata. He has been working on Nabarun for some time. He has recently received his doctorate degree as well from Center for Studies in Social Sciences, which is affiliated to Jadavpur University. And also, Samrat has been writing about issues or topics related to Naxalbari movement, post-humanism, continental philosophy, and critical theory in general. So over to you, Samrat, to share your experience and then to introduce our first guest, Shumanda.
Thank you, Shodhi. Just can you put me on screen? Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, Shodhi, for your very kind introduction. I hope I'm audible. If not, then please interrupt, because sometimes the voice becomes very low. So
you are.
I'm audible. Thank you. And so I would thank sincerely to our guests for agreeing to be a part of this panel. I thank Suman Mukhopadhyay, Anustup Basu, and Priyanka Basu for being there, and also my co-editors who have been so supportive all along. It was always a collaborative effort. It was like writing a book together, but it was more difficult because there were so many contributors from across the world, located in different places, speaking different languages, and still coming together with Nabarun. Now, I hope the audience who are listening to this conversation are already tuned about Nabarun to some extent, but just to give a brief introduction to Nabarun through his work, not biography. I'm not reading out his biography. Nabarun Bhattacharya is an author, a Bengali author who wrote most of his works in Bangla, and he's an experimental Bengali alternative avant-garde writer who started his career with his first short story, perhaps in 1968, called Bhashan, and his first poem, celebrated poem, which has been widely read, is Ei Mrityu Upatyaka Amar Desh Na. It may not be factually exact, maybe that he has written something before that, but these are the two important works with which his journey has begun in the Bengali literary world. And just a few points which I would like to say before opening up this conversation is that when we planned this book, it was like imagining something which was very possible, very much possible, but yet it has not been attempted with that amount of rigor in the Bengali literary scholarship. That is holding up an author, discussing an author on an international global platform who has not already been highlighted. The only Bengali author who has been widely discussed, translated, and read across the world is perhaps Rabindranath Tagore. But after that, how much work we have done, particularly Rabindranath, I am mentioning Rabindranath because Rabindranath has been heavily canonized in the not only in the Bengali literary circle but across the world. His international recognition in the form of getting a Nobel Prize also contributed to that. But in Bengal, there has been a line of authors who are not also mainstream in Bengali literary world. So the counter literary practices which questions the mainstream form of writing, not only in Bangla but also in any languages, and who tries to break the form and who also has a certain kind of counter politics to the ideological structure in which we belong at present. So those authors have been widely read, discussed in the avant-garde literary circle, but they do not get an international platform to be discussed and argued also, because argument is also very important in this regard. Now, my engagement with I should begin with my engagement with Nabarun, and that started not today. We have a filmmaker with us, filmmaker and a theater person, a theater director, actor, Suman Mukhopadhyay. But before introducing him, I should say that my journey with Nabarun started with film, with a film in particular, that is Herbert, which was released in 2005, and which was also created some kind of debate in the Bengali literary circle and in the intellectual circle, because there was some kind of censorship acting on the film. Initially, it was not permitted to be shown in the London, and it was under the left regime. Ironically, because Nabarun, we know, was a radical left writer. We should also mention that, but not confined to the traditional doctrinal form of leftism or Marxism in particular. He went beyond that. That is very interesting. So he was avant-garde not only because of his left radical politics. He was not confined to a certain kind of authoritative left regime, but also became an internal critique of that. So Nabarun's that film shook me, affected me a lot, because it was like the past of the Bengali culture speaking to the present. There was a sense of continuity and a break. And interestingly, the subtitle of the film was called Conversations with the Dead. So I will not go into Herbert, of course, but it started to make me rethink my research, and I started working on Naxalbari movement, which was a radical Maoist insurgent movement in Bengal that happened from 1967, and it spread out and it affected the Bengali political world till the mid 70s in particular, and it also has its delayed after effect in today's Indian politics as well, in the form of Maoism, though it has a significant difference with that, but we are not discussing here. Nabarun Bhattacharya's engagement with Naxalbari in terms of memory affected my reading and understanding of the movement, how to look back at a movement in a time which we apparently call the time of the post-revolutionary capitalist regime, where Marxism, the impact and influence of Marxism was falling apart throughout the world, and there were a lot of ethical dilemma of how we should think about our present, how to think ethically. As you can see, the title, I have the book with me, so I should show it to the audience. This is the book. You must have seen it already. The title of the book is Nabarun Bhattacharya, Aesthetics and Politics in a World After Ethics. So we are talking about a world where the traditional form of Marxism was being questioned, partly because of its party-oriented doctrinal form. Many Marxist regimes all across the world were turning authoritative and violent sometimes. We were actually questioning those forms of Marxism, and also the inroad of neoliberal form of capital, which almost accommodated each and every nook and corner of the world. a form of globalization, a form of globality, which influenced the subalterns as much as the elites, which created a new form of consumerist culture, and all these issues were coming in Nabarun's work, Nabarun Bhattacharya's work. And we have tried to accommodate this whole range of issues as much as possible, but also acknowledging the limitations. This book is a compendium of critical essays and translations, and we have put translations in the beginning just to remind that translations are important to introduce an author, but not enough, because we also need to discuss, because translations are sometimes done and the author is forgotten, or it is kept in a small corner of a library where we're waiting for people to come and read, pick it up. But the task of a literary scholar, a social scientist, is perhaps also to foreground the works critically and to show how it resonates with the world literary concern. Like now the world, how we can recanonize, rethink, reincorporate Nabarun as a part of the world literature. The world not as not the world of globalization, but the world which counters globalization, which counters the neoliberal capitalist regime, authoritative regime, which appropriates people's lives in different ways. And the poems and also the essays deals with critical concerns such as, and also spread across the Indian nation, places of the different places of Indian nation, and also different places of the world, different forms of exploitation. As I already mentioned, that Nabarun Bhattacharya is a radical Marxist author. He is not giving up his radical concern of a transformed world, but also trying to rethink that how to bring up that radicalism, how to transform the world. We do not have a ready scripture for the change transformed world. It spreads across places like Jharkhand, Bihar. We have included a story like Scarecrow. It also talks about the exploitation of like small time, precarious, informal workers, just like in a story called Leopard Man, which is located in Delhi, Noida. And there are poems like a family poem which I translated myself. It talks about a genealogy of fascist violence, genocide across the world. So there are world literary concerns, concerns beyond the local, translocal issues, which features, and he often, Nabarun makes his stories and works in the form of a collage, which starts from the local but goes beyond that. It moves from Bengal to Gaza to the war zones of Iraq. So this kind of resonates, and this kind of concerns we can see in Nabarun's work. He deals with nuclear catastrophe. It talks about not only the violence of an exploitation of man by man, but also the exploitation of nature and animals, the non-human by man, and the objectification of the world by man, by kind of supremacist ideology, supremacist humanist ideology of man, and he moves towards a post-human, more inclusive worldview. So with this, I will stop. I think I have been able to introduce the book to some extent, and also to add that Nabarun Bhattacharya's career has been spread into three zones. One is his radical Maoist, Marxist way of looking at politics and life, which spread across the early 70s and to some extent the 80s. And from late 80s to early 90s, he was talking about the coming of a post-revolutionary world, the crisis of the failure of revolution all across the world, and the present concern, and then the third phase, which is the millenaric phase of Nabarun, which shows how mm, uh, in the post millennial world, uh, the concern of exploitation and oppression is not only confined to a regular Marxist scripture of revolution, but goes beyond that. So he includes confusion. Uh, uh, Undecidability is a part of the work of his work, and maybe through this sense of undecidability, through this sense of foreboding uh, a future which we are all waiting of, an ideal future which is not there here, but a utopic future which is there beyond this world, and we don't have a regular answer to it. With this consciousness, I think it spread across the last phase of Nabarun's work. Now I would invite Suman Mukhopadhyay on stage to to share his experiences about. I will just introduce Shumanda very briefly. He is a very important filmmaker of our generation, but I should mention that we have known him for long because of his theatrical career. He was a theater director, a wonderful actor also, and his theatrical work includes plays like Bishorjon and Bishorjon adapted from Rabindranath Tagore, Raja Lear adapted from Shakespeare, Tista Parer Bittanto adapted from Devesh Ray's novel, and he has been like dealing with the question of subaltern elite difference. He has been dealing with Nabarun Bhattacharya's work also. One of his most important theatrical production has been Kangal Malshat, which inspired our generation a lot. And then his films are also as important as his theatrical productions, and it includes works adapted from Nabarun Bhattacharya like Herbert, Mahanagar at the Red Kolkata. Herbert was in 2005, then Mahanagar at the Red in Kolkata in 2009, then Kangal Malshat. It has also been adapted as a film by Suman in 2013. But he also adapted Tagore's work like Choturango in Bangla, and his latest film, which is in the post-production stage, and which we will be able to see very soon. The screenings will start of Nazarband, which is his latest directorial contribution. He has also been the face of the civil society movement for some time, and his important awards include the National Award for Best Bengali Film for Herbert. Then he got the Best Director at Philadelphia Film Festival and the Golden Palm at Mexico International Film Festival. With this brief introduction, which is not enough for Suman, I believe, I pass on to Suman Mukhopadhyay to talk about Nabarun, how the journey which we started with Nabarun now. It has been started long back with Suman because he because cinema in a way is a medium which is globally accessible, and because of the subtitles also, it has already reached a world audience and created interest. Some professors who are not Bengali speaking people have taken interest on Nabarun, I know, because of the film. And I, being a Bengali, also was not that aware about this alternative experimental writer Nabarun, whom I started to read under the influence of Suman's film. So I just would like to share what kind of responses did he get from his film productions, from audience across the world, how it resonates with the global political concerns at present, and how it goes beyond the local, but also remains rooted to the Bengali literary and political issues. With these general questions, I pass on to Lalda, to Suman Mukhopadhyay. Shorit, can you please put Lalda on stage?
Thank you, Samrat. for your introduction to the book and also to introduce me. Uh, Actually, I was pondering on the issues which you just mentioned, which is the kind of the main content of your book, which you have just published, and we have come together on that occasion of the publication of this book. But to me, Nabarunda was also got introduced through that novel called Herbert. As you have first seen the film Herbert, and then sorry, and then you kind of got curious about Nabarun as a literature. But for me, the novella Herbert, which I read in the mid '90s somewhere, that kind of exploded a new energy in the Bengali literature scenario. And of course, as a student of literature, that kind of resonates a kind of a international flavor to that very uh, short novel. It is an explosion in Bengali literature. I would say the linguistic zeal, the the areas he covered, the kind of mm, what I would say subversive forces working, the literary subversion working in his novel, and he spanned kind of 50 years in that novel. So somehow I don't know, I kind of got triggered to to make a film out of that. So I met Nobarunda at that time, and that was the beginning of a long, long, long journey till his death and a friendship where I would say that my relation with Nabarunda was very organic, the kind of critical theory you spanning out of his work, that what you have been trying to uh, mention in your book or what you try to say in your introduction. To me, it was so personal, it was so organic, it was so the proximity of our relation, it kind of gave a completely new dimension to his personality and my reading of his work. It was completely different because somehow I saw him so closely, I interacted with him so closely that there's certain subliminal kind of interaction which started happening between me and Nabarunda, and we discussed many things. Although I have done, you forgot to mention two more works which I've done uh, on Navanda's novel. One is I did a play on his novel called Khalna Nagar, which I did in Delhi with NSD Repertory, National School of Repertory Company in Delhi, which is in Hindi, called Khilona Nagar, which is a dystopian novel. And I did a play which he translated. It is Fire Razors by Max Fries, which he translated, and he himself directed the play long before. But I did it uh, on Bengali stage again. So those are the two more things which I've done with him. At him creatively, what I'm talking. Herbert was my first film. Then I did Mohanagor, which is a kind of uh, with three stories which I took and made one film. And then, of course, Kangal Malshat as a film and as a theater. And then, of course, this plays which I've done with Kilona Nagar and the translation. So, what happened? I will tell you a few anecdotes. When I was trying to adapt the novel, which will give some kind of, without talking, about his huge contribution, the literary contribution, or how he revealed the cliches, the linguistic cliches, and the societal lies, and how he continuously undercuts and subverts Those are the areas, of course, in the critical theory you are doing that. But I have a more deeper connection with him, and I should share those moments which will reveal the person, will reveal the man, and there's no difference between the literature or the man, the individual. They were so closely, merged together, and that's the interesting part. I have not seen that in many authors or many creative people I worked with or associated with or collaborated with. And also, I should mention here in the panel, we have another speaker, guest speaker, Anustup Basu. Anustup was working with me since Harvard. Anustup was the executive producer of the film Harvard, and he did the subtitles of the film, and he did subtitle of almost all my films. So he might also reflect something on his experience on while making the film Harvard. So what happened when I went to him uh, with the proposal that I want to make a film out of it? He was quite uh, amazed at the beginning that you want to make a film. Uh, then he said one thing quite strangely, that when I first gave away the manuscript of Harvard, I think Proma first published his novel Harvard, that when I gave my manuscript to the publisher, the day I gave it away, I was crying, literally sitting on the floor, that finally it will come out, it will be published, it will be public. The 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 novelty is kind of compromised. This is strange, thing for an author to say that that I'm crying because it's gone now. It's gone to the public. So that's one thing he mentioned. But of course, that is the connection, that he immediately gave me the permission to make the film, and then we discussed a lot of things. I read out the script to him. Then he only came only one day for the shoot, only one day. And he asked me, when is Shubhashish Mukhopadhyay, who played the senior Herbert. The junior Herbert was played by, in fact, three people played Herbert. One is uh, that time my brother's son, he is Dayad Mukherjee, who played the baby Herbert. Then Joyraj Bhattacharya played the young Herbert, and Shubhashish Mukhopadhyay played the senior Herbert. So what Nabarunda told me, I want to come the day he will act, he will be shooting, Shubhashish. So he came for that one day, and that's it. Then the next thing I I did when I had I asked him, "You want to say rough cut? You want to see a cut of the film?" He said, "No, I will see the completed film. I don't want to get into this." So the day I was screening the film, which is almost done, I remember he was sitting next to me, and we have been screening on a big screen. And if people who are aware of Harvard and Nabarunda remember the very famous chapter in the novel and also in the film, when the Binu, the Naxalite boy, he he got killed. He was shot, and he died in the hospital. So that scene was shot by me in the hospital, and I remember that the scene was going on the screen, and suddenly, after that scene, Nabarunda just got up from his chair and he walked out. I was completely, I don't know that, is he completely rejected the film? Is he not liking the film? That is the most important scene in my film, and he walked out after that. So I think that he's completely, what I would say, rejecting, or you know, I don't know, he's not liking the film. So I was sitting like his stunned person for 5 minutes. I my muscles froze. I don't know what to do. If the author Navarunda gets angry with the film, something has gone wrong. So after 5 minutes, I slowly got the courage to get up from my seat, and go out of the theater to look for him. Where have he gone? Have he gone home, or he's smoking a cigarette or sipping a cup of tea? And I saw he's standing in one corner looking outside. So I slowly came and stand stood beside him, and saw he's crying. He was crying. I said, Navarone, what happened? And he started crying more. And what happened? Tell me. He said that, it is impossible to see Binu's death. I I cannot take it. So, that was the moment. I also felt like crying. Even today, when I'm narrating this, uh, we're getting goosebumps. That. So that how much passionate he was about his characters, about his political notions, about his political beliefs, and that moment. And then I told him, okay, Binu has gone now. You have to watch the remaining part of the film come. So then he walked in again. But what he said, that's the moment I felt that was the commitment of a writer. That is how, that the relation of the author with his creation, and the characters here are so much connected to his, to his psyche, to his emotions, to his life, to his daily living. That important. I have throughout noticed that his connection with his stories and the characters whom he have created, and that's the power of an author. That's where, whatever, you talk about him. I've seen him personally, that how he interact with the people on the streets, how we used to go and spend, there's a famous, place close to Navarun's house in Golf Green, which is called Hori Gopal Thek. It is a kind of a, black market liquor shop. So sometimes we go there, and we buy liquor and we would drink together. And I can see that his experiences, he has not written one word in his novels, in his poetry, in his stories, which you have not seen, which you have not realized, the persons which you have not been interacted with. Everything is real. But as an author, he transcends them through his art, through his linguistic zeal, which is scathing pen. That's the thing, that he can take the reality to a completely different level. Uh, the transition is very interesting in his literary creations. That how he can really translate that reality, which he knows by every inch. He knows that reality, and how he can bring some kind of a different kind of reality, to bring that power, to bring that scathing energy, to bring that political commitment and understanding. And his political understanding was very, very unique kind of understanding, which is completely very authentic. You cannot, I cannot confine him in one kind of, thinking. Whatever you say, he is a maverick. He quotes Buddha, Marx, and some religious text in one breath. He can do that. He has that what I would say, that knowledge and intellectual prowess to do that. The power to do that. He can bring together all this different kind of knowledge. Uh, but I would say that his understanding of the society, his perception of the reality, and his strong commitment and what he believes. So that is why when I started working with him in another script, and I can see, and slowly I can know this man. I get closer and closer and closer till the death. I know till the last moment when he died, in Thakur Pukur Cancer Hospital. Uh, I'm learning this man. I'm trying to know this man. That how he gradually uh, trying to grapple with this new world, with this new changing reality, and the great disaster we are facing right now, in the historical moment we are in right now. I was grappling, I think that he was continuously grappling with that. If you see, there's now coming back, forget about my cinematic work with him, like his novels like Lupthok, and his novel like Khalnanagur. Uh, they are completely different. We cannot, what I would say, that what I realized every day, talking to Nabarun, mixing with him, reading his work, that it is impossible to confine him into any kind of, literary genre, or critical theory paradigm. He's completely shifting, and that's his power. He's constantly changing his way. He's trying to attack reality, try to endorse reality, try to subvert reality, and also transcend reality. Every time it is different way. So his language changes, his his linguistic style changes, and his and of course he's completely adapting himself to these new forms of politics, new way of domination, which is operative today. And he was, and what he was at one point, I think he's a very strict person with strict moral discourse. I would say that he would always say that, Lal, he used to call me Lal, of course. uh, Lal, I think that we need to read or see anything after 70s. I think we have come to an epitome of our achievement, of artistic achievement. So that was the one kind of thing you to say, but that doesn't mean that Navananda was not reading the contemporary literature. Uh, Absolutely, but he somehow always tried to come to that point, and that that after 70s, do you really think that we have surpassed that the great mastery we have achieved till 70s? He was always asking me these questions. He asked many other questions. He was a kind of a what I would say that he would about East European literature, Russian literature. He's immensely. He knows every bit of it, especially Russian literature, Soviet literature, pre-Soviet literature. But another thing, this is a very funny story, I would say. This what defines Navarone as a person. That I remember, he has a Maruti 800. It's the first model, the first which when it came to India. So we are going to somewhere. He was driving, and I was sitting on his left, and we are crossing the Golf Green bus stand, the bus terminus, which is 234 bus terminus. So it's the office time, the rush hour. So there's a huge queue of people waiting for the bus to come, and we just crossed that queue and we went, and some of the people in the queue watched Navarun and me going together, and then after a couple of minutes he said that, you know what those people standing in the queue are saying about us, talking about us. What? Then he said that they were saying that, look, this is the son of that famous Bijon Bhattacharya, who was who who was poor, who struggled throughout his life, and who lived life with a lot of struggle, and he is now driving a Maruti car. They must have discussing this. then I said, yeah, maybe. Then he said, the issue is that, that is not the issue. The issue is that, then what is the issue? Well, the issue is that they are very unhappy that I'm driving a car. They would have been very happy if I had been begging there in the queue and saying that, look, I am Bijon Bhattacharya's son and I'm Nabarun Bhattacharya. My father was a struggler, so I am also a struggler, so please give me. So they would have been happy to see me begging rather than me driving a car. That's it. So I was laughing, when he was saying this, but that gave a perception that what he, as a person he was, he was trying to continuously reassess him as an artist, himself as an artist, reassess his work. And he was also very critical about his own work sometimes, and which he talks very personally. So I think that these are the few things I can narrate thousands of small details I faced with him. I I I, I experienced with him throughout, but these are the very moment which defines a person and his understanding of, he has no so-called middle class sympathy. What we does, we have some kind of middle class sympathic for the subaltern, for the people. He was so clean and clear about his perception that there is no kind of unnecessarily sympathization. It was completely political understanding, completely sociological discourse. You know, his his understanding of the subaltern, the people, marginals, is so organic, so deeply committed that there's no space for any sympathy, so-called middle class sympathy, what most of the people intellectual of we suffer from. That are we doing it right? I don't know. He can say that this bugger is actually cheat. This man, this just maybe a rickshawala. He was charging extra money, and he said, "Why you are charging extra money? This is not your. This is not the fare, given fare. You're charging. You're cheating me because you know that I'm not a regular passenger. So you're cheating, asking for 10 rupees more." So no, so he will not sympathize and give that 10 rupees extra because he's a rickshawala, right? So I am trying to say that this is where he is in stand. He will never leave that man alone because he has been, by sympathizing, by giving 10 rupees extra. So I'm talking about this middle class sympathy we sometimes we display by doing this. So that's why I'm saying that his perception, his understanding of reality, these people whom he wrote about, like they wrote about Marshall Bodhi, he wrote about Fathalus, and he himself was a Fathalu. He's always used to say that I am also Fathalu. So he knew these characters through his blood. He has spent time with them. It is not kind of figment of imagination. His imagination comes when he transcending, when we trying to, his political discourse is not like something calculatively coming in his writing. It was there in his organic, in his guts, in his understanding, in his perception of reality. So this is what I at the beginning I can share with you, which is my experience with Navarunda, and I think that let's follow up with other things after this.
Thank you so much, Shomanda. Thank you for sharing these experiences. What we will do is, as we move ahead, I'm sure there will be some questions and comments coming to us through the chat box, and I can already see one, which will take, of course, a little later, once other than those for Suman Mukhopadhyay, who would have to leave soon. But let us follow up on that, on the kind of experiences that he has shared. Um, Something that, of course, somebody like me who has read Nabarun in a completely different way, I would rather say that When I was growing up in Alipurduar, I didn't know much about Nabarun until I came to Kolkata to do my undergrads. So I have always felt that the moment I read Nabarun and I then got to know more about Nabarun, I was completely hooked to the kind of writing that was not exposed to me before. And this is something that I completely agree with what Suman Mukhopadhyay has just said, that Nabarun can be so unsentimental and cut and dried sometimes in his representation of the class that he deals with, and he can be. And I was thinking about stories such as Amar Kono Bhoy Nei To, stories where people like, or even was it Halal Chanda? Then this kind of steamroller, the stories that I got uh, to be introduced to Navarone. I read Fataru, of course, and it was an excellent story to me. And I think in Presidency College, it was staged when I was fortunate to see kind of a staging of it. And then later on got to watch the films. So to me, of course, now that I retrospectively look at Navarone, I feel like Navarone is definitely a very urban writer because he's associating himself or representing the kind of urban poor or the underclass or the urban slums. But he's a writer, as Suman Mukhopadhyay was also saying, that can reach across not only generations or periods, but also like geographies and times. The breadth and the width with which he is bringing in sort of Bulgakov or sort of Chekhov from the Russian part to like his interest in the science fiction from the US and Britain. And Kalanagor is something that I have written on in the book that is particularly very terse I found, but particularly one of my favorites from Navarone. So in that breadth, I would also like to very quickly my own experience of the book and then move on to Anustup, which will probably resonate with some of the experiences with Shumon Mukhopadhyay as well. About this particular let me just like share only one quick example of what kind of challenges we faced about this book, and I'm sure like something that Shumon Mukhopadhyay could also relate to when he was cinematizing Navarone. Navarone is not a very easy writer to translate into English. Probably one of the most difficult writers to translate into English, especially because of the language that he uses in his work. The language which is not only colloquial but sometimes too conversational colloquial to be able to be translated into, like Dobore Chang, something like that. I mean, this kind of language is sometimes could be very ritualistic as well to be translated. So, but at the same time, we were very clear from the very beginning of our conversations with Bloomsbury about this book that we will go ahead with a section on translation and a section on critical writing on his work. And we thought that because Nabarun was as local as he was global in his in his use of themes and topics, he needs to be known widely. So we had to speak now with translators, professional translators, and also translators who have been sort of working in the capacity of translators in various issues and magazines and journals. So we came out with a few stories, poems, and interview, none of which, of course, could have been possible without the support of Nabarun's son, Dr Bhattacharya, who has been very encouraging throughout from the very beginning of the project. So when we went ahead with this, Bloomsbury initially, like us, also had a bit of a confusion that what we were actually seeking from this book. So we wanted this book to be a model for introducing and exposing writers who might have been writing in regional or vernacular languages, but have a lot of uh, issues and linguistic styles and modes which are comparable with the ones we are more exposed to globally because of the global literary market. We would read a writer winning prizes, writing in English more, then we would know Navarone. But what is excellent about Navarone, and it's completely astounding to me, is how quickly he has been taken over by translators based elsewhere, be it in Italy or the US, and translated into English, Italian, Russian, in different languages. And I get to know from Tathagata and others that number of translations are already underway. So this is something that I also wanted to move ahead with and ask as I introduce our next speaker, Anustup Basu, is he has himself, as Suman Mukhopadhyay was also saying, uh, written the scripts into English on some of his film, but also something that he has been himself associated with is writing in English on Navarone, something that he has also done for our book as well. Something that I was also interested in asking is about why is somebody or based in the US, what is it that Anustup Basu that he speaks, or what is it that Navarone can be done if he could be translated or sort of script written into English? Does he feel like Navarone has much of a global relevance right now, and to what extent? So before I ask that, of course, let me introduce our next speaker, Anustup Basu. Dr. Anustup Basu is an associate professor in English Media and Cinema Studies and Criticism at University of Illinois and Urbana Champaign. He is the author of Hindutva as Political Monotheism, and this came out very recently in, I think, was it September or October? I don't remember, but in 2020, of course, from Duke University Press. Also, Bollywood in the Age of New Media from Edinburgh, and a number of essays in various international peer-reviewed journals. Anustup is also a film producer, which one of the significant productions has been Harvard, for which both Anustup and Suman worked together, which then went on to become winning the Indian National Award for the Best Regional Film. And more recently, as Samrat also mentioned, both of them worked together on the Hindi feature film Nazarband, which is now an official entry at the 2020 Busan Film Festival. So I will now hand it over to Anustup Basu to ask him to share his experience of working on or with Navarone, and also what he thinks about Navarone as the relevance of him in a global writing scenario. So over to you, Anustup.
Thank you, Shodhi. But
Anustup, just one moment, because I'm really curious to hear what Anustup has to say and what Priyanka has to say and what others has to. But unfortunately, I have to take an exit, from this discussion. But I hope you're recording this, and I can listen to whatever later what they have seen, because I'm really curious to hear, because it's so interesting session. But I have to sorry, and my apologies to everybody.
oh dear.
Sorry, it seems like the link got frozen, but can others hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh,
Yes.
that's great. So we know Shubhanda has to leave, but of course the recordings are there, so he'll be able to get back. And I'm sure, like also, if there is any query, he can be able to respond later on. So over to you, Anustup. Over to you.
Thank you, Shodhi. I actually wanted to ask Suman one question, but well, since he has to go, we can come to that later. So I'm going to begin with my experiences with Navarone, and then gradually come to the question that you have asked specifically about the English translation and how Navarone translates across cultures. Actually, Suman, I think, is back. Can you take a question before I?
Yeah, I think I got thrown out.
One
Yeah,
question for you.
yeah. See, please, yeah.
Yes. So, if I'm sure you remember, the first cut of Harvard was, I think, something like 156 minutes or something in that region.
Yeah.
And we brought it down to 141 minutes, which is
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
official version.
Correct.
All these years, I've always regretted that. I mean, that time we obviously had a lot of pressures, especially from the distribution sector. But I always felt that cut where there was a lot of uh, a cinematic exploration of Nabarun's Kolkata, which had to be left out, which was an even better, now lost in time. Do you have any regrets about
Okay, for me, I don't think there's no point regretting them, because this is a part of your artistic journey, that you have to throw out a lot of things, and at the same time you accumulate a lot of things. But I only regret that I don't have that version of that cut with me. I could have just kept one copy of that, with me. Now it is completely impossible, but I don't think I regret, because I think that's the part of your artistic journey. That even in Nazarband, I have to throw so many things away, uh, and that's the. But yes, that was the first cover, like more than 3 hours, I think so. That
I
was,
think it was just less than 2 hours. Yeah.
that's less than 3 hours, yeah. But I think that you can say about that fantastic experience me and Anustup had in when Herbert was invited to Museum of Modern Art in New York. We have 5 screenings at MoMA, New York, and we have 2 Q&A sessions where Anustup was also present. I think that you can reflect a little bit on that experience. That was completely a different experience. But I think it was going to be a fabulous discussion of post me. Please send me if you record it. So, bye bye, everybody.
If I may interject, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Sumanda, for
Thank you,
your time.
Lalda.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So
Yes, over to you. Yeah.
I met Navarunda around 1992, if I remember correctly, at a very at a very interesting place. It was the house of uh, Professor Manobendra Bandyopadhyay, who passed away recently, a legendary figure who introduced virtually single-handedly literatures of 3 continents, Africa, Latin America, and East Europe, into the Bengali milieu. And so it was in his house where we used to, I was in my early 20s then. We used to congregate and do what Bengalis call adda, basically talk about things. And that is where I met Nabarunda for the first time, Bappa, as we used to call him. And so my first introduction to him was in a milieu where there was a gathered group of intellectuals, both young and old, Shivaji Bandyopadhyay being another figure, and Lalda, Suman used to come from time to time. And we were talking about Bengali literature from Boktola to Bunkim. We were talking about Juan Rulfo, Alejo Carpentier, Garcia Marquez. We were talking about East European science fiction, Karol Čapek, and Stanislaw Lem. And that was the environment in which I was first introduced to Nabarunda's thinking, and then just a few months down the line, Proma published Herbert, and it was a sensational event in our early moments in terms of literary scholarship. I remember a friend of mine, Shodhi Bhattacharya, who teaches at Jadavpur University at present, literally dragged me to Patiram, College Street, and we got Proma. and went back to our respective houses, and we read it. I read it in one night, which was not that difficult because it was a short novella, and I read it again. And so for us, we were that generation. We were immersed in Latin American, African, and other transnational literary formations across the world. And we were also the early legatees of kind of a new dispensation, the breakup of the Soviet Union, the rise of the Hindu right culminating in the destruction of the Babri Masjid, 6th of December 1992. And of course, globalization coming in of big media, consumerism. And we were trying to find our footings in that environment. And that is when I felt, when I read Herbert, that this was inevitable. This was a form of poiesis. This was an experimentation with language, a transformation of language expression, a kind of a critical marshalling of memory, the inheritance of 19th century Bengal, as well as the worldliness that is around us, which was giving expression to what we were thinking and what we were waiting to express, what we were struggling to express. And that was a momentous experience. It was a generational shift in perception, in thinking, and a whole lot of other things, which and that moment obviously remains with me. So what exactly are we talking about? The editors in their Arka, Samrat and Sourit, in their introduction to this volume, use a very interesting term, charismatic imagination. And that is exactly what I'm referring to. That a form of imagination which sort of, appealed to an entire generation which was struggling to find its own language. And so for me, at least, in the growing up in the 90s, that is that transformational moment, which would, in the fullness of time, I mean, there were other novels like Tistabari Brittanto, Debesh Roy's, Akhtaruজ্জামান Ilyas's Chilekotar Shepai, and also Said Mustafa Siraj's Olik Manush. And Herbert was a very special kind of component in that transformational moment. And it would, I mean, this was also when, obviously things were changing. Kabir Suman Chattopadhyay in those times had just brought out his very influential album. By the end of the decade, Suman Mukhopadhyay would stage Tistabari Brittanto, which I think sort of changed Bengali theater forever, and so forth. But when we are talking about Nabarun and that explosion called Herbert and its resonances over many texts over the years, we are talking about a pantopic imagination, that an imagination that is marked by a sort of a critical worldliness that you cannot, that sort of flouts the binaries that we were habituated to, like Eurocentric, provincial, East, West, etc., etc. Right? So here was a kind of a counter-encyclopedic mode, which I have tried to write about in my essay, a kind of a critical subversive reckoning of the entire spectrum of inheritance, intellectual as well as artistic inheritance. Something that, that sort of ranged from alchemy to AK-47, from dinosaurs to dynamite, and so on and so forth. So it was, this is how my journey with Nabarun began. And then, towards the early years of the new millennium, around 2003, 2004, Suman and I started working on Herbert, the film. And it took us quite some time. And, the script was done very painstakingly. We worked in Calcutta, we worked in Pittsburgh, we worked in Toledo, and, sent emails, met, struggled. And then finally we realized, after a lot of heartburn, in terms of how exactly to do justice to this, that we realized that Nabarun is an extremely cinematic writer. And, I'm just not talking about his, his felicity with dialogue writing, which is astounding, but also when we think of, environments, scenes, the opening movement of Herbert the novel, where these kids come out of Herbert's house deep into the night, tottering, drunk, and walk down the alleyway, and so on and so forth. So those things started, helping us flesh out the script, and then you saw the film. And then I was obviously going to do the subtitles. I did the subtitles for Herbert, and then for Mahanagar at Kolkata, and also for Kangal Malshat. And that is when I used to have long conversations with Navarone over the telephone. Sometimes both of us were in Calcutta. Sometimes I used to call from Champaign to Kolkata. The last one I remember was while the post-production of Kangal Malshat was going on, was in, I think, 2013 or thereabouts, when I, myself, Suman, and Nabarun had a three-party conversation. And Nabarun, I think, was in Bombay that time, and Suman was somewhere in Europe, and I was in Chicago. And most of the times it was about how does one translate obscure references and modes of expression into a kind of an understandable English, which would be registered by a global audience in seconds. And Navarone was great help in doing that. And in terms of that event that Suman was talking about, I think in 2008 or 9, there was this very prestigious showcasing of Herbert, a week-long showcasing of Herbert at the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art in New York. And both of us went there, and we were very apprehensive about how the film would be not received, but how the film would translate in terms of experience. Right? I had been to other screenings in other campuses before, in Washington, D.C., in Pittsburgh, in Champaign, Chicago, etc. But obviously the audience in New York was different. And we were extremely relieved to see that. I mean, it was fantastic. They were unself-conscious. People were laughing without inhibition in the right moments and reacting as we hoped they would. And when I say unself-conscious, it's because I mean that's important because in the era of cultural sensitivity and kind of a wokish political correctness, mainstream American audiences are often sort of inhibited when they see a foreign film in terms of I hope by laughing I don't offend the director who's just sitting in the second row, etc., etc. But that is something that did not happen. So, and as in terms of Nabarun, the person that I had known for more than 2 decades, almost a quarter of a century, what can I add to what Suman just said? We're talking about a person just completely full of anecdotes, and my favorite moments when I think back come from usually these public occasions. I mean, obviously, when we were talking amongst each other, that was great. But there were some public occasions when, we would be standing and then he would lean in and say something really funny, which would make it very difficult to keep a straight face. And I remember one occasion where I think, yes, Che Guevara's daughter had come to Calcutta City, and she was being felicitated by the state government in the Navarone premises, the auditorium, Navarone's premises. And, there was some functionary of the Communist Party and state government standing there and making announcements as Che Guevara's daughter was being felicitated. And Nabarun stood by me and anticipated almost each and every cliche that would come out, right? And with uncanny accuracy. It was like, see, now he's going to say that. And that is what exactly happened. And what that tells you is that this is a person who has so successfully affected a critical unraveling of an industry of cliches, habituations, commonplaces, cliched perceptions as well as utterances, because he knows them very well, right? So we are talking about, a poet, a novelist, a raconteur, rabble-rouser, a Marxist, a Buddhist, and he was capable of wonderful compassion, affection, and love, extremely sensitive, and in a very old-fashioned sense, but something that is very rare nowadays, a completely civilized human being with a razor-sharp political mind. And so in that, let me end by thanking the editors for this much needed and wonderfully conceived volume. A lot of pain and meticulous care has gone behind it. And I think this is the correct way of introducing Nabarun, or translating Nabarun and the Nabarun experience into an Anglophone world. I always wanted to write about Nabarun all these years, but I did not want to do so in a vacuum, in a kind of a cultural emptiness in the Anglophone world. But this is exactly what I wanted to be a part of, and what I have sort of waited so long to be a part of. I think I'm going to stop there for the time being and let the conversation proceed.
Thank you so much, Anustup, for sharing these experiences. We'll move on as questions and comments come in. We'll sort of highlight them, but it's something that, of course, is something that Orko and I'm sure our next guest, Priyanka, will also have something similar or sort of comparable to share. So over to you, Orko.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful listening to this conversation for a long time, and these kind of conversations better happen over a certain period of very productive slowness, possibly, and a very rich slowness. I won't take a lot of time, but before I introduce Dr. Priyanka Basu, let me very briefly share what would be 2 or 3 points about my own journey as well as my perception of Nabarun Bhattacharya. So I should possibly mention that before this, I was associated with a Bengali volume, which was on Nabarun. It was edited by Oddoy Choudhury, my friend, and me. And we did that book a couple of years before this book came out. It has recently had a second edition, and Dr. Basu's essay is in that second edition, the much improved second edition, which has some new articles in it. So there was a certain journey, as Sourit was already pointing out, with the Songlap issue, the Bengali co-edited volume, which, by the way, both Samrat and Sourit also contributed to, and finally this one. To very briefly chart out my own journey with Nabarun, because I was born in the middle of the 80s, I didn't read Harbert in its time, in that sense, in 1994. I do remember listening to Suman and Tomake Chai, which came out almost at the same time as Anustup was saying. And I came to Harbert as a first-year English literature student in Presidency College. And though it's a little bit anecdotal, I should mention that some of us literally had that book in our bag every single day, not to read it, but to make another person read it. And it became an event. It was a movement in that sense. And because there was so much to identify with. I mean, the terrace where Harbert plays, the melancholia of that political imagination in Nabarun was deeply arresting and affective and affecting in a certain way. I did read the book and watch the film almost at the same time, to the point that I can't remember which one came first in terms of my own chronology of it. And but let me point out one interesting thing which has already been implied in a way. Here was a writer making a very interesting, not a compromise, but a very interesting negotiation between a very complex aesthetic form, such as we see in Kangal Malshad, this very palimpsestic narrative form with newspaper cutouts, with illustrations. So he's a very formally experimental writer. And he could somehow blend that formal experiment with his radical political conviction. And to sort of very briefly touch upon this idea of literary dissent, literature is a form of dissent for Nabarun. For a writer like Nabarun, literature is a form of political, social, cultural dissent in certain ways. So there is no literature of dissent. Literature is dissent. That's the point I'm trying to make. The other sort of, in that sense, becoming I had with Nabarun Bhattacharya as a writer, and I must say, I always shied away from meeting him. I did encounter him a couple of times in the Calcutta Book Fair and also in the British Council Library, where I would see him very intently looking out for the new books, the new novels that have come out, and so on. But there was always a respectful awe in that sense, and I would not meet and talk to him. I was, and I have been a writer in little magazines, a short story writer, and someone who has also written a novel in the last 15 years or so. So there was a lot of learning, as far as I'm concerned, not just as a critical academic, but also as a creative writer. I think, at least, if I could say it like that, some of the writers who have interested me in writing anything in Bangla creatively, and one of those writers would be Nabarun in that sense. So having edited a literary journal for a long time, for more than 7-8 years, having written in little magazines, I also had that being and becoming as a creative writer with Nabarun, which I wanted to point out. I'll finish with a third point, and I think the book has been very richly introduced already. I don't want to talk too much about the book and my own little contribution to that, but as one can already see, it's a passion project, and it's something that we have been doing for a long time with a lot of care, maybe with some coercion as well. I mean, coercion is part of care in certain ways, perhaps. But we've been trying to do whatever we have been able to do. To finish on that final note, I mean, and again, this is something that would resonate with what Shumanda and Anustup said, that Nabarun was an event, even for a college goer in 2003, 2004, primarily because of these cultural productions. I mean, the fact that the novel was in discussion because of the film. Phataru had become a very popular play on the Bengali stage. So Nabarun was an event in the sense of a rupture. And this is the historical milieu is important here, because we are talking about the final years of this jaded left government, and we are talking about a radical left writer who critiques that left government as well. I mean, again, Nabarun, of course, is not a copybook Marxist, and of course, he never had a party line to toe. And he would always have that dynamism as a left writer, as an engaged political writer. And that dynamism meant novels like Harbert, novels like Lubdhak, which I remember again significantly came out of a small press. Obhijan was Obhijan was the first publisher of Lubdhak, a novel about stray dogs and sort of almost a bizarre dog revolution, which has planetary dimensions. Again, picking up on science fiction and so on. But without going into that, I do want to mention that Nabarun was a rupturous phenomenon, an event in that sense, because there was a certain cut away from the governmental position in Nabarun, in spite of being a left writer in a left ruled state. And that irony perhaps needs to be pointed out. And of course, we could go on talking about the experience of reading Nabarun, especially the rupture of language, the way he would, in a way, almost slap the Bhadralok reader in terms of those linguistic subversions. But that will bring me to this particular point of a reader's experience of Nabarun. And here I would have a question for Dr. Basu. But before I do that, let me introduce Dr. Priyanka Basu, who's our third and final guest speaker. Dr. Basu is a project curator of the AHRC-funded digitization project, 2 Centuries of Indian Print at the British Library, London. She has received her PhD from SOAS, South Asian Studies from the Department in South Asian Studies from the Department of South Asia. And her thesis was on Bengali Kobigan. She is also a dancer, a practitioner, and she has variously written on and worked on politics of culture in contemporary Asia in very strongly in the field of theater studies. And again, it would be interesting to hear her reflections on Nabarun as a theatrical event, which is very interesting because Nabarun is not primarily a playwright, and yet that cultural phenomenon of the Nabarun event, if I may say so, in early 2000s was so strongly theatrical and cinematic. So maybe Dr. Basu can reflect on that. But I do have another specific question for Dr. Basu, and I'll leave with this and leave it over to her. And this is a slightly critical question, but I think it's a question that needs to be asked. What does a female reader get from a very heavily masculine writer like Nabarun, who almost identifies the act of rebellion with a kind of masculinity? Which is not to say we do not have characters like Baby K, I mean the fire-spitting dragon, as it were, who can literally change everything in a split second. But we do have a very complex, let's say, representational regime when it comes to masculinity and femininity and their balance in Nabarun's works. And I would be interested in knowing how a woman, and again, without going into, of course, those binaries of gender, but how would a woman perceive Nabarun's work simply at the level of readership? And then, of course, a critically informed scholar like Dr. Basu, how would she appreciate Nabarun's works on top of that? And also this final point about theater, if she could possibly reflect on Nabarun's adaptations in the theater, and because her chapter, I know in the book, is also about an embedded theatricality in certain ways in Nabarun's work, which is a theatrical prose as well as a prose that stages a kind of theatricality, as it were. So I'll finish with that and leave it over to Dr. Basu. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Orko, and thank you to all the editors for bringing out this wonderful volume, which was so much needed. And this is a great opportunity for our global readers to get familiarized with the work of Nabarun. I would not probably agree with the term recanonize, because canonizing Nabarun is, I think, going against the politics that his literature stood for. And having said that, I think reading Nabarun requires a certain kind of rigor, and also requires us to unlearn the literary training, especially in Bangla literature, that we undergo. And both Suman and Anustup have talked about the 19th century literary tradition, especially bringing in the example of Hutum, and the kind of language that was used at that time, and how that has been kind of purged of, that colloquial register. And while reading Nabarun, I felt, and very recently while reading Hutum again for a chapter that I'm writing, I felt that there is a very strong connection, and there's a strong kind of, relation with that language which has been lost, and which has been kind of, standardized, purged of its very, very local character in Bangla literature. I'm especially reminded of this one particular section in Hutum, where he, in just one sentence, he is able to project the shift of power from the Nawabi era to the coming in of British imperialism, colonialism, and that he's able to do it, this through this device of literary amplification, also resonates with the work of Nabarun, who uses the similar techniques when he talks about characters going into, taking them into the site of Iraq war, or talking about US imperialism, or even talking about the Second World War. So I find a close kind of connection between the two as a reader. But having said that, unlike the other two speakers, I am at a disadvantageous, if not less advantageous position of not ever having met, I would not say met, but having the chance to interact with the author. I did see him once at the Kolkata Book Fair, but couldn't muster the courage to go up to him and speak to him. I was probably very intimidated by the stature of his knowledge, and that was also a time when I was slowly getting familiarized with his writings. I came to his writings quite late in my life, when I was doing my master's and MPhil in JNU. And thanks to Orko and Sourit and their constant cajoling about writings that I had to submit for Shonglap and then for this volume, it has brought me very close to his writings, and I still need to read more. But it has introduced the world of Nabarun Bhattacharya first through the ideas of performability and theatricality, which I will come to, but also through the question of gender, which for me as a woman writer, a woman reader of Nabarun's works, is still an issue that I am grappling with, and there is a world there which still is waiting to be opened up. I mean, we all know that Fatarus are the most commonly known characters, and much more popularized than his women characters, and his world is essentially a masculine world. Women characters are sparse, but they are not less powerful. I mean, in their presence, in their function as characters in the text, I would say sometimes in whatever little examples are there, they are more powerful than the male characters. I mean, I've written about Baby K, who's a cyborgian entity. I'll come to that. But even in his in a short story, which I again read recently, I did not have a chance to include it in my chapter, but I think it is a preemption of what is going to happen in Baby K. So this short story, Matha nei to ki hoyeche, what if there's no head? This is again about a sex worker who's headless, and Nabarun goes on to characterize this. So before going into that, I mean, I was recently watching Q's documentary on Nabarun, and I found this anecdote there by his son, Nabarun's son, Dr Bhattacharya, where he talks about how Nabarun was into theater. He was a theater actor, and he was probably performing in one of the red light areas of either Kalighat or Shonagachi, and there were a group of sex workers who actually fundraised and handed over to him a small bundle of notes, which Nabarun never opened. And when he was asked about it, he said this is the best trophy he could have ever got. So he knew this world, he knew these people, and therefore it's unsurprising that the strongest women characters, whatever little, however little he has written about them in his short stories, they are about these marginal entities, the sex worker, the woman sex worker. And I mean, as you read the introduction to this volume, where the recently published volume, where the editors have kind of periodized Nabarun's work and set his work into 3 periods. I think this short story, Matha nei to ki hoyeche, which is before the downfall of the Soviet, this is a story which kind of talks about the post-millennial confusion and undecidability, the dystopic future already. And the device he uses here is that of laughter. And recently there has been a lot of writing in ecofeminist criticism about how laughter, which is subversive in nature, is essentially beyond the human. And this is a concept which I think Nabarun goes on to use in his characterization of Baby K, who's a cyborgian entity. She's a mixture of social reality and fiction. And she also goes on to portray Nabarun's fascination with, not just bestiality, but his fascination for machines. And I think Anustup has already spoken about that. And for me as a reader, then as a woman reader of Nabarun's work, I think it's I mean, definitely it's a masculine world, but he, in his way of characterization, in his way of progressing with the narrative, in his way of, infusing the female characters with the possibilities of destruction, in hoping about a post-feminist world, he does introduce very critically and very consciously this whole idea of intersectionality, um, which is, again, intersectionality is a legal concept, as we know, from as it was introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw. But it is so, it's intrinsic and part of the ongoing struggles and ongoing issues that are, true of gender, class, and caste. Uh, Nabarun's world is definitely driven by the disparities of class position. But I think this is also one of the ways and one of the vital ways of understanding what gender struggle is. And therefore, he brings in a character like Baby K, or even in that short story, also in a piece like Otto, where there are no, women characters as such who are prominent like the male characters. If you look at the beginning of the narrative, Chandan, the auto driver, he's quietly observing women who are nurses and sex workers who are returning home at, in the dark of the night, and these are some of the passengers he ferries. So so these characters, who are at the margins of the urban existence, also, non-recognized, these are the characters who occur refrain like in Nabarun's narratives. And by bringing them into this, masculine world, which is definitely subject to critique, he does offer a possibility, which is, which is embedded in the cyborgian identity of both the sex worker, who he just calls Vesha in that short story, Matha nei to ki hoyeche, and also in the characterization of Baby K. And as we know, the cyborg gender is a local possibility, but with, possibility of global vengeance. And in his understanding of this possibility, in his understanding and introduction and critique of intersectionality, he's also talking about, several political affinities. The way forward is through political affinities between different disenfranchised groups. And gender is not beyond that. So as a woman reader, as somebody who works on Nabarun, I think this is a very important point, which I come across in his literary world. And this is probably another, it's a vital point through which we can enter the idea of theatricality or performability in Nabarun's literary world through his characters. And it's difficult to translate Nabarun. It's difficult to bring into another language that register, that colloquial register, that very local kind of dialect, which a reader of a foreign language is not familiar with. But I think there is a performable quality in each of his texts, which is which is challenging for an actor. I mean, as you will also see in the documentary, Q's documentary, where Shodhi Bhattacharya, who's acted in films like Harbart, and also in the documentary itself, he goes on to say that going through this process of reading Nabarun's texts again and again as an actor, and then kind of executing the character is like a penance. And it's an activism which Nabarun's literature makes an actor do, because it's just not literature for its own sake, but it is Nabarun's political vision. And it is also the readers or the actors' responsibility by reading these texts to execute them, bring them into action. And I think I have not seen any, on-screen adaptation of Baby K, although I know there's one. But for me, that text is so full of theatricality, not just in the final annihilation, but also in the language itself. And I've written about it in one of the special issues in Shonglap on Nabarun Bhattacharya. So I think Nabarun's world literary world is full of these possibilities. And one just needs to kind of read and reread these texts and find out those possibilities of responding to them and using this literature in activism, in talking about gender roles, in talking about gendered violences, talking about gender discourse and activism, by using these as examples. And that is my takeaway point from Nabarun's literature, from his short stories, from his novels, and his interviews. I think I will end there because we also have to take in question and answers. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Priyanka Di, or to put it more formally, Dr. Basu. Thank you so much for that discussion. I think I'll put it back to Shodhit, but I have a feeling we have already overshot the time, so we could possibly have a very quick exchange among us, but then prioritize questions as they keep coming from the floor, from the YouTube floor, let's say.
Yeah, thank you, Arko. Thank you, Priyanka Di. Dr. Basu, as Arko says. So, of course, I personally have a lot of queries, but I am also aware of time. I'm going to be taking these questions as they come in on the YouTube chat. So I'll just flash this particular question from Sumana Roy about undecidability, that is for Samrat. So this is Samrat, as you can see it on screen. So you mentioned in your sort of introduction about undecidability and confusion. So could you just respond to this question?
Yeah, sure. I thank Shomana Di for this wonderful question. What I was thinking about is, in a theoretical way, we talk about undecidability in Derridian terms, but I will not go into that. In Nabarun's writing, particularly if you trace the genealogy of Nabarun's career and his political intervention, you will see he is, in a way, I will not be very comfortable using this term, but because of a lack of a better term, I use the word. He's more a post-Marxist writer because he comes from the Marxist school of thinking, but he tries to go beyond that, particularly in a world where we do not have a regular scripture of how to bring about revolution, and if revolution is at all possible, or what a post-revolutionary world would look like, whether the success of a Marxist regime would take us to the path of a transformed, ideologically perfect world, we do not know. Particularly when we have seen the fall of the Soviet regime and the transformation of communist regimes across the world into proto-fascist governments, authoritarian governments, we do not know. And also because of, I have already said, the neoliberal onslaught, which has reduced, as I was reading one article by David Harvey, he was talking about the transformation of Marxist culture, quote unquote Marxist culture, into a kind of specialized niche affair in the post-90s world. So in that kind of situation where there is already a confusion of values, of ideologies, we should start from the confusion. But Nabarun, being an intensely political writer, introduces a character like Herbert, who cannot be accommodated. Suman Mukhopadhyay has already talked about the multiplicity of Nabarun, which is coming again and again, that we cannot script Nabarun into a particular theoretical paradigm. With that note, I will say that, we do not know also how revolution is to come. And a character like Herbert or a character like Fokis, there is a story called, I don't remember the exact title, but if we translate it in English, it will be something like One Day in for Fokis' Life, where a kind of a factory worker whose factory has been locked down, and he lives the life of compromise and extreme abject poverty. He meets once in a while, one day in a week, with his comrades towards the evening to discuss about revolution. So the possibility, and the 90s, the period of the 90s and early 2000, I would call it a period of passive revolution, taking it up from Noronovic Samadar. Particularly the regime of the CPIM ruled West Bengal, where almost a revolution has already happened, ironically, because there is already a Marxist government in power. So from that situation, can we bring the question of revolution? Can we talk about social justice beyond the script of a party, or particularly after we would also bring the question of the failed revolution. After Naxalbari, there has not been a major political uprising, though there have been questions of poverty, injustice at various levels. So a character like Herbert, who is mad, who cannot be accommodated into a script, or the character of Baby K, who is a petrol drinking cyborg woman, who is almost an unreal character. Nabarun creates these unreal, impossible characters, or characters who could not be accommodated to a script, to to signify that through this confusion, through this kind of kind of bricolage, or a kind of assemblage. The assemblage would be exact theoretical term. Through this kind of assemblage of events and things and confusions, maybe a revolution or a radical social transformation can someday be generated. I'd respond this much.
Shorit, if I may, if I may ask a question to Anustup, Dr. Basu, Dr. Anustup Basu, let me say that, because we have two Dr. Basus here. Anustup, I was just wondering, and because you've also worked on the politics of Hindutva, how do you see the significance of a writer like Nabarun and the India that he represents in his works again and again? And I deliberately say India because he also has his own way of moving away from Kolkata. And we see that movement very clearly signaled in a text like Halda, which not unsurprisingly again comes towards the end of his career. There is the return to Kolkata, perhaps with Mabaloge novel. But nevertheless, as we know, Nabarun's Kolkata is never just Kolkata. It keeps, having these scale shifts where it moves, as Samrat has previously said, between, places like Gaza, Soviet Russia, Kolkata, and so on and so forth. So I was just wondering, as someone who has worked on the contemporary politics of Hindutva, how do you see Nabarun's importance as a writer of potentially new left ideas, especially given our time when the whole politics of the left, and by that I don't just mean the Communist Party of India, the whole philosophy of the left and the whole politics of social justice seems to have been partially discredited by the governmental discourse. So I was wondering if you have a response to that. Thank you so much.
So I'll take off from where from Samrat's point. So, when I was, for instance, I was talking about the 90s and a kind of, a period of dislocation and despair, which, folks of my generation had inherited after the fall of the Soviet Union. And there was this feeling, overwhelming feeling, that Marxism was not a constitutive discourse of resistance anymore. And it obviously, not to put too fine a point on it, it was in crisis. So that was one. Number two was a part of that crisis, which we have realized over the last quarter of a century, is that we need a new political vernacular of resistance. Not just of resistance, of political reckoning. And in terms of not just Bengal or India, but in global terms, be it Gaza or be it Kashmir or Calcutta. And in the milieu that we see in Nabarun's work, it becomes, it gets the quest for that political vernacular sort of is rehearsed and staged in many ways. But the most obvious expressions are of what you would call confusion, but productive confusion, would be a kind of a radical commerce between, Tantra and Leninism, in Doldobayosh or the Choktars. A kind of a lost legacy of vernacular pieties. It could be Vaishnavism, it could be so many other things. And current concerns of kind of a plebeian struggle against metropolitan neoliberal gentrification. So this is the assemblage that we are talking about, and it is it's a recurrent, it's a renewing assemblage that sort of engulfs categories, in a certain sense destroys them, to sort of only to transform and regenerate them. And that, I think, is the register of the theatrical, that pertains to the register of the theatrical and the performative that Priyanka was talking about. And the third thing, I think, which is important in terms of global fascism, rise of authoritarian cults, and Hindutva, is the question of the media, which is a recurrent concern in in Nabarun's work. He writes pages on that, and in various modes of of satire, of and irony and other things. So what I find so interesting about these obscure figures who are oneric presences, ghostly presences, or real presences, from Bengali aviators of the 1930s to gurus of the 19th century to obscure poets, etc. What they bring is a kind of a pressure of memory, of rememorialization, or I would say counter-memory, in a media environment which Nabarun took very seriously. And a media environment which, and we know what we're talking about because we constantly talk about it, that it eviscerates memory. It sort of it leads to just fragmentation and dispersal, etc. All these postmodern terms. Or think about what how Bernard Stiegler understands this dispensation. That where we are talking about a dispensation where the futurity of the media becomes the futurity of life itself. And when you talk about the evisceration of the past, what it means is that the past becomes an absolute memory. And in the Indian context, what we are currently witnessing is a kind of an industrialization of the past to produce an absolutist vision of Hindu memory, where Rana Pratap can win the Battle of Haldighati, and so on and so forth. And I feel Nabarun's explorations, he invents a kind of a historical landscape filled with specters and historical figures who surface and then submerge. It is part of a critical exploration of this, and a displacement of this media absolutism. It's a recharging of critical memory, which we should take very seriously. And the concomitant quest for a political vernacular is, I think, the only way we can go about it. We need a political vernacular, new kind of, we talk about it all the time. Maybe a certain assemblage of Marxism and Ambedkarism, or whatever it might be. But it has to be a kind of a vernacular. And that's the only way we can combat Hindu nationalism. I hope that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anustup, for that brilliant response, especially a lot to think about the notion of the political vernacular. We do have a question for Priyanka Di, so let me flash the question here on screen. And if Priyanka Di could respond to that, that will be wonderful.
Thank you, Shodipto, for your question. Yeah, I think I was talking about this earlier, reading Nabarun as an act of dissent, but definitely this is, there is the danger of getting consumed by niche readership, and that is probably and precisely why this volume is out and why the auditors have brought this out to get a global readership, not just to familiarize them with the works of Nabarun, but also probably to understand Nabarun as a way of reading literature in the way of doing activism. So not confining it to a niche readership, as you say, which is which has been almost local in its character, but also bringing this volume out so that it is in dialogue with similar kind of literature, similar kind of literary activism, which is there in the global literary scene. So bringing this volume in a kind of dialogue with that. So I would agree with you to a certain extent to say that there is a possibility, there is a danger of getting consumed by niche readership, but as responsible readers and writers and as people who are constantly engaging with Nabarun's work, I think the onus also lies on us to not let that happen and to respond to Nabarun's work in various possible ways, not just through writing, but through performance, through theater, as has been happening. So that would be my response.
I'm aware of time, and I think we have already overshot the time by more than half an hour. But so unless there's another pressing question, maybe we could close the session here. But just to very briefly respond to a point that was made in Shodipto's question, was perhaps this whole cult following that Nabarun started having post Phataru has its own reductive aspects as well, and that became in a way instrumental in us avoiding another voice of Nabarun. So when we think of the question of the political in Nabarun's writing, we sometimes tend to reduce it to a certain kind of rabble rousing alone, which is not the only paradigm of politics in Nabarun's writings. I mean, he's also a writer who writes a lot about domestic politics, about micro politics in that sense. I mean, thinking of texts like Toy, which we have in this book, and also texts like 4+1, which is political in a much more Kafkaesque way, perhaps, than in a very sort of in a certain sense an orthodox, engagé, engaged kind of a tradition. So he's an incredibly complex writer with a very complex idea of the political. I would personally again thank all the three guest speakers here, Dr. Basu, Professor Basu, Anustup, Priyanka Di, and also Sumonda, who contributed to a very personal exposition of Nabarun as a writer, and in certain ways perhaps helped us identify with the pulse of Nabarun's writing in certain ways. And before I finish the conversation, of course, this is now over to the two co-editors for any final words. But thank you so much from my end for this wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Orko. And very briefly again, thank you so much, everyone. I mean, Priyanka, the Anustup, as I have known you personally, with all this da and di, sometimes we tend to add to show a lot of affection. Thank you so much for coming over, and thank you so much also for sharing, sort of the experiences that makes Navarone so diverse and enriching, not only a reading experience, but also an author and a personality. I mean, when Suman Mukhopadhyay was speaking, I was thinking about, some of these anecdotes are so personal and yet something to sort of cherish for so long, and that he could go on and share these anecdotes with us, which now we have recorded and will be there for some time on YouTube, is something to go back to. And this is something we also thought would be the right time and the opportunity for us to introduce Nabarun and his work, the personality that he had or that he is, and the tremendous experience that somebody has while reading him. Uh, that should be out. We have done what we could do through translation, and it is impossible for anybody to translate the experience of reading an author in their original language into a kind of a target language. But I hope, and I personally hope, and I'm sure like all editors and contributors will hope that personally as well, that Nabarun is read more widely. He is not only an important author and absolutely sort of an experience of readership, of reading, but also somebody who is so contemporary and so urgent, an author for our generation. So with that, I'll hand it over to Samrat to say his closing words.
Again, I thank everybody for being there. We have already thanked Tathagato Bhattacharya, the son of Nabarun Bhattacharya, for giving us the permission for translating and publishing his work, and for his support all along. I also like to thank Professor Supriya Chaudhary for his kind support and her translation and her forward to this book, which can give a brief introduction to what we are going to, what we have tried to do in this book. And one last thing is that a book is a beginning, and the beginning happens through its limits. We definitely have not been able to include everything in the book, not all aspects of Nabarun. As I was discussing we were discussing Nabarun's work, short story called Abba. I was discussing it with one of our translators, V. Ramaswamy, who has translated 3 stories in this volume, and he instantly translated Abba, because Abba is a story which is located in the context of Godhra riot, and we had a discussion on translating works on Godhra riot and the kind of fascist, proto-fascist, fundamentalist tendencies in the Indian politics in the current scenario. And we were talking about translating a body of works on this from across the Indian languages. This happened because only of Navarun. Because we translated Navarun, we brought him into the limelight. This is the way afterlives will happen to this book. And with these closing words, I think we can leave. I thank everyone.
So thank you, everyone, and we will be formally closing it now
Thank you,
as
all
soon
of
as
you.
possible.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And please force us to write more. Looking forward.
Sure, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Looking
Thank you.
forward to it. Yeah.
Thank you.